In 1939, Joseph Stalin ordered the invasion of Finland. He expected the war to be over in 2 weeks. A victory parade was already planned.
Come on! We need to go!
Instead, and the most powerful army on Earth was brought to its knees by an army of soldiers on skis. This is the story of the Winter War, a 105-day nightmare of ice, humiliation, and defiance. A battle that would lure Hitler into his single greatest mistake.
The enemy thinks we are broken, beaten, that we will surrender.
In November 1939, the world's attention was fixed on the West. Poland had just been torn apart by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and Hitler's Germany seemed the only threat, but far to the north, in the near Arctic cold. Joseph Stalin was preparing for a war of his own. His concern was Leningrad. The Soviet Union's second most important city sat uncomfortably close to the Finnish border, within easy artillery range. With a larger European war seeming inevitable, Stalin saw this as an unacceptable strategic vulnerability. He issued an ultimatum to Finland to cede critical territories on the Karelian Isthmus, lease a naval base, essentially give up its defensive sovereignty. In exchange, the Soviets would grant them a worthless patch of swamp further north.
We will not bow to these demands.
The Finns, a nation that had only won its independence from Russia 2 decades prior, negotiated, but they would not break. They refused. Stalin and his high command, the Stavka, were shocked. They viewed Finland as an insignificant peasant nation.
I will crush them.
They predicted the campaign would last 2 weeks, tops. A victory parade in Helsinki was already being planned. On November 30th, 1939, the Red Army attacked. On paper, this was not a war, it was an execution. The Soviet Union unleashed 4 armies, nearly 500,000 men, thousands of tanks, mostly 26s and BT-7s, and was backed by thousands of aircraft. Against them, Finland mustered 300,000 men, mostly reservists, with perhaps 30 tanks largely obsolete, and just over 100 aircraft. They lacked anti-tank guns, heavy artillery, and, well, everything. The Soviet plan was simple: a massive frontal assault on the main Finnish defense, the Mannerheim Line on the Karelian Isthmus, while other forces launched supporting attacks further north to cut the country in half. But the first problem emerged immediately.
Get me the commander, now!
Stalin's purges of the late 1930s had hollowed out the Red Army's talented officer corps. Their replacements were politically loyal but tactically inept. And they were wearing the wrong uniforms. The Red Army marched into one of the harshest winters on record, with temperatures frequently hitting -30, even -40 degrees Celsius. They wore their standard olive-brown khaki uniforms, making them perfect targets against the white snow. Their equipment wasn't winterized. Tanks froze. Guns jammed. Soldiers succumbed to frostbite in massive numbers. The Finns, conversely, were fighting on their home ground. They wore white camouflage. They moved on skis, gliding like ghosts through the dense forest, while the massive, mechanized Soviet columns became trapped on the narrow roads. The Finns did not try to hold a line. Instead, they allowed the Soviets to advance. Then, mobile ski units would strike the flanks of the miles-long columns, cutting them into smaller, isolated pieces. They called this tactic Motti. Motti is a Finnish term for a bundle of firewood, cut and stacked to be dealt with later. To the Finns, the isolated Soviet divisions were just Motti. Once they encircled, the Soviets could not be resupplied. The Finns would destroy the field kitchens, a devastating psychological blow in the lethal cold, and then, with ruthless patience, they would tighten the noose. They used their Suomi KP-31 submachine guns, a superb weapon. Most importantly, a new invention, the Molotov cocktail. These gasoline bombs became their only effective anti-tank weapon, aimed at the engine vents of the 26s. At battle like Suomussalmi, 2 entire Soviet divisions, some 45,000 men, were completely annihilated by 11,000 Finns. The Finns captured hundreds of badly needed tanks, artillery pieces. And in this chaos, a legend was born, Simo Häyhä, the White Death, a small farmer. Using only a standard Mosin Nagant rifle with iron sights, he believed a telescopic sight would reflect light and give away his position. Häyhä was credited with over 500 enemy kills. The world was stunned. The Red Army's incompetence was on full display. The miracle could not last, and Joseph Stalin was humiliated. In January 1940, he changed tactics completely. He dismissed his disastrous commander, Voroshilov, and appointed Semyon Timoshenko, a competent and brutal replacement. Timoshenko understood that tactical finesse had failed. The solution: overwhelming violence. He concentrated an enormous force on a narrow sector of the Mannerheim Line. This time, there would be no uncoordinated infantry attacks.
I want that hill taken by sunrise.
On February 1st, 1942, the new offensive began. For days, thousands of Soviet artillery pieces hammered the Finnish concrete bunkers. Observers called it the most intense bombardment in the history of warfare. Up to that point, heavy bombers flattened rear positions. Then the infantry attacked, but this time, they were supported by heavy KV-1 and 34 tanks in their first combat appearance, which the Finnish weapons could not penetrate. The Finns fought heroically. The Mannerheim Line was cleverly designed, but it was not built to withstand a pure material assault on this scale under the sheer, crushing weight of artillery and numbers. Bunker by bunker, the line broke. By the end of February, the line was breached. The Finnish army was exhausted. They were out of ammunition. And most importantly, they were out of men. On March 13th, 1942, after 105 days of fighting, the Moscow Peace Treaty was signed. Finland had lost. They ceded 11% of their territory, including their second largest city, Viipuri. But they had won. They preserved their independence. The Soviets never made it to Helsinki. And the puppet government Stalin had created was quietly disbanded. The cost to the Soviet Union for this victory was staggering, over 120,000 dead and hundreds of thousands more wounded. Frostbitten, or missing, the war was a military disaster and a political embarrassment for the Red Army. However, one man had been watching this war very closely from Berlin, Adolf Hitler.
You see? This is our destiny.
Witnessing the Red Army's poor performance in Finland, Hitler concluded that the Soviet Union was a colossus with feet of clay, ready to collapse from a single swift kick. It was a fatal miscalculation, forged in the Finnish snow, that would lead to Operation Barbarossa, and ultimately the downfall of his own Reich. The Winter War was over, but its consequences had only just begun.